Hello and welcome to the Northern Myths podcast, where we explore the myths and legends of Northern Europe from an archetypal perspective. I'm Luke DeWolf.
And I'm Dan Larrabee.
This is our 2018 Yule special and year in review. This is the first episode of this kind that we're doing where we're not following along with one of the stories that we've been reading or where we're not interviewing someone, but we hope you like it. We're going to cover some of the great traditions about Yule, which is, if you don't know, the time of year around the winter solstice, or the time when the nights are longest and the days are shortest and all that great stuff. And it is, of course, a very, very important festival in the calendar year for the Northern European peoples. And we're going to cover a bit of that. And then after we've talked about some of the most fun and most interesting Yule traditions, we're going to do a little bit of a year in review, and we've got a lot of acknowledgments for people who have helped us out. And we just wanted to give some recognition to those folks because we definitely couldn't have done this alone. So thanks for joining us, and I hope you like this special episode. It'll probably only come around once a year. I think that's how often Yule comes around. But we might actually start doing these sorts of episodes more often. We'll have some news about that later, but for now, how's it going, Dan?
Oh, I'm pretty good. How are you, Luke?
Yeah, not bad at all. And I think I'll just cover our usual housekeeping before we get underway. Thank you very much for listening. And if you would like to support the podcast in any way, there's a few ways you can do that. First of all, we always appreciate a share on any of the social media platforms we're on. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Northern Myths Podcast for those, at Northern Myths for Twitter. We're both personally on Twitter at North Myth Luke, at North Myth Dan. Also on Instagram, Northern Myths Podcast. We're on YouTube, Northern Myths. So on any of those places, if you want to share a link or give us a like or a subscribe on YouTube, we really appreciate that. Reviews are always appreciated regardless of the platform, especially iTunes, Apple Podcasts. That one in particular is really big for us, just reaching more people. So if you like the show, a positive review would be greatly appreciated. And, I wish I didn't have to say that, but, the negative reviews are less helpful for showing people that there are folks who like listening to the show. And we also have a couple of ways you can support the show directly as well. We have a merchandise store under his lovely Krampus sweater if you're viewing YouTube. And I'm not nearly as stylish, unfortunately, but Dan is sporting our Northern Myths Podcast t-shirt. We've got a few different designs on our web shop, so the link will be below on the YouTube description of the podcast notes. So if you want to check that out, it's a great way to support the show if you want to represent the Northern Myths Podcast. And we've also got a couple of pages on our website with recommended books and music, and we might eventually add some other things, but they're all works that we found influential and helpful with the show, and a lot of music that we recommend, especially some by guests that we've had on the show. And that's all through Amazon's affiliate program. It all links back to Amazon. And if you make any purchases through that link, we get just a little bit of that. And it's at no additional cost to you or anything like that. So that's just a great way to support the show if you want to do some shopping. And am I forgetting anything, Dan?
No, I think that's about it for the housekeeping at the beginning.
Wonderful. Well, you want to take it away then?
Yeah, sounds good. So we're going to be talking about Yule today, and sort of the idea of like celebrating dark nights and basically what can you do to make it less terrible? Because at this time of year, and it's kind of hard to think about it now because, we live throughout the world and we've got electric lights and all that kind of wonderful stuff, furnaces in our homes. But back in the day, when it was dark out, that was when you would go missing in the woods, or predators would come and get you because their predators are generally much better designed to see in the dark. You'd also just freeze to death like that. These were all serious and real threats to human life. So, and I don't know why this started happening, but it's almost like they decided to look into the deep, dark night and say, hey, you know what? Instead of being, huddled in our houses and scared, we should just have a crazy party for, 12 days, 2 months, and go from there. We often talk about the importance of order and ordering chaos, but it's also equally as important to embrace chaos. And I think we're going to see that that's kind of what they're doing here, because Yule isn't. Well, one, we know it's not unique to Europe or northern parts of Europe. First of all, we've got the obvious holiday around it, Christmas, so we still celebrate this time of year. But also like Saturnalia and like Bacchus and things like that. Like that was all during the winter. And Saturnalia comes from Rome, certainly a different climate than Northern Europe. But it was still this idea that, let's go wild. So I'll talk a little bit about Saturnalia, because there's at least in like Europe, there's a lot of, I guess the technical term is syncretism, but there's a sort of a mishmash of traditions, and and there was already a mishmash of traditions sort of before Christianity came along, and then sort of put their stuff into the mix and everything. So I'll talk a little bit about Saturnalia. So Saturnalia was a celebration of the god Saturn, as you can tell from the name. It was celebrated more midwinter than at the beginning of winter, which is the solstice. Saturnalia was solstice related. Yule actually isn't, and I'll get into that in just a second. But so Saturnalia was solstice, longest night of the year. It would go on for days, and everything was sort of turned upside down. So they would, like, people at the, let's say, bottom of the dominance hierarchy would be elevated to the top. You would go around harassing like rich people for money. There were any like rules around sexuality were sort of brushed aside. It was a time to go nuts and crazy. I don't think it went this far, but it was kind of like those movies about like The Purge, where like the rules were like really relaxed. And there is a need to relax rules sometimes, where you just sort of have to let go. You can still see this, not so much in the West. I actually think we suffer for it, but in other countries, like for example in South America, they've got Carnival, and Carnival is this crazy party, and even it's like the name is like party of flesh, like carne means like meat, flesh, right? And it just so happens that it happens like right before Lent, which is a time of austerity, and so that they sort of do this big blowout, and then they get really serious about, okay, we're going to give this up for Lent and no meat on Fridays and that kind of thing. And even like the closest we'd have to an actual like cultural thing would be like Fat Tuesday or Mardi Gras, which is French for, Tuesday fat. But basically you'd eat up all the delicious things in your house before going into Lent. And then it's sort of a 40-day long slog until you can indulge again in fun things. But yeah, so there's often a need for humans to indulge before they go on to a point of like austerity. And winter is an austere time. Nothing is growing. All you have is what you were able to harvest when it was warmer. So there's a real concern and a real need to make sure that your things are going to last throughout the year. But before you do that, you want to have kind of a blowout. And it's also kind of I've heard of it as kind of a mixture of Thanksgiving and Halloween with Saturnalia, but also with Yule. that, I mean, you'd go around sort of terrorizing people in a fun way. Like again, it wasn't exactly like Purge. Like, I don't think you were necessarily killing people, but you were certainly having a good time and, drinking lots, all that kind of good stuff. So that's kind of Saturnalia. And then a lot of the Christmas traditions that we see come more from Saturnalia and Rome, which makes sense because that's Christianity was born in the Roman Empire. So then when they came to Europe, that we had Yule, which was a more midwinter festival, and the Northern Europeans and the Norse and the pagans there, they didn't go off of a solar calendar. They went off of like a semi-solar lunar calendar. So everything was based around phases of the moon. So Yule actually wasn't celebrated on the solstice. Now, I say that's like for Northern Europe, like the Celtic peoples definitely still celebrated the solstice. In more Southern Europe, there were still things around solstice, like Stonehenge itself was like really cool things happen with the sun at Stonehenge, like going through certain stones and that kind of thing. So solstice was very important, but as you got further north, it was not that it was less important, but I think the impacts were a little bit different because like weird things happen. Like you get, months of darkness and then months of light and that kind of thing as the further north you get up. But so the Yule, this midwinter festival, was celebrated in midwinter, and it would usually happen the first full moon after the new moon after the solstice. And so that's when they would bring in the Yule log. And, it was midwinter, so like winter had a chance to really settle in. The Yule log would be burned for hopefully all 12 days, but, and that would be an auspicious sign if it did. If it didn't, then the next year might be a hard one. There's a great importance placed on Yule ale. In fact, Hakan the Good, when he was ostensibly a Christian ruler, but he understood the importance of keeping the pagans happy. So he actually made it a law to make sure that Yule ale was brewed and that Yule traditions were upheld. And if you didn't brew the ale, you'd be fined some ridiculous amount. Like it was a very strict and important tradition that he wanted to keep around. So that's kind of neat that, very wise of him as a ruler to make sure that most of his population who weren't the aristocrats would be happy and sort of better able to maybe assimilate into the new culture that was being sort of put upon them. But yeah, so Yule ale and like drinking and drinking and drinking as much as you possibly could. And then you'd eat boar or goat. So all of the like the Havamal rules about like not drinking, like out the window. It's not, this is not a time for that. Part of the reason was that Yule is very much a celebration of Odin. And Odin is, first of all, sort of above all, he's the god of ecstasy and like fury and all this kind of like craziness. Sort of that when you have an experience that's, beyond just the mundane, like, drinking your coffee or whatever and going about your day. This is like, altered state, like madness. And so you would celebrate Odin. And I think I think all of these festivals get into that, but there's just something so right about celebrating that kind of like madness and ecstasy and fury during like the darkest nights and the coldest nights of the year. It's kind of you're really embracing that idea of chaos in the underworld and just going under. And instead of being afraid of it, you're taking it into yourself. Instead of being afraid of the wild hunt going through the sky and the dangers of being outside and everything that comes with winter. You're saying, no, like I'm a part of this. It's not happening to me. I'm engaging with it. And so I think that's one of the reasons why it's such a fun time, no matter sort of what celebration you're doing, whether it's Saturnalia or Christmas or Yule. It's just that you're going into it and embracing sort of that chaos that most of the time you're trying to keep at bay. And that's something too that I think the Christians got right when they sort of attached Christmas to the solstice in this time of year, because it's the birth of Jesus. Well, if you want to have, the sun, and I put that in air quotes, that comes from sort of the commingling of, the civilizational father and then, the natural mother. Like, this is exactly the time of year that you would celebrate that, because you've got things are getting darker, things are getting murky. And then after the solstice, the light starts coming back and it's, things are new again. And it's just again, they probably didn't do this on purpose. It was probably more of a practical, like, okay, they have this big celebration that we're not going to be able to get rid of, but like, let's put something on it. But it just fits, because like it's almost like they inherently knew, like, this, okay, if we're going to put a celebration here, this is one that this new life, this new light. I mean, and if you've ever gone to mass around Christmas, like the symbolism of light is everywhere, and new life and all that kind of stuff. Like, it's everywhere. So they kind of intrinsically knew what symbols to sort of transfer over to make it as seamless as possible. And with that, that kind of covers the timing of the year for Yule and these other winter celebrations. The only other thing I'll add is that there's generally two months that are considered like the Yule months, and I'll probably mess up the pronunciation, but it's Yule Tungul and Distingstungul. Yeah, I did my best. But what happens is, because of the lunar calendar, so we've got a solar calendar, and every year we like lose a day kind of thing until leap year, and then it resets and that kind of thing. Well, because it's lunar, you're losing more time. And so if I've understood this correctly, they would just sort of like gather up all those days and then get like this, add in like the Yule month every few years. And it was actually considered a sacred time as well, because it was outside of the normal year. It was kind of this time when you were more connected with ancestors and connected with like heroes and the gods, because it was you're sort of outside of time. And I think we actually experienced that for anyone, who celebrates Christmas and has time off during Christmas. That period before, or between like Christmas Day and New Year's, it just kind of like all blends together. Like, you don't know what day it is, and you're always seeing family and friends and drinking and partying, and then and then you get to New Year's and then you start like keeping track of the dates again. But it was kind of this magical time, and Mircea Eliade has a great, it wasn't really a saying, but there's an excerpt from one of his books, and I'm paraphrasing here, but it's basically every time that you talk about or engage with the ideas of heroes or religion, you're actually you're taking yourself out of the mundane world and putting yourself into like the supernatural. And that's what they were doing here, because with the celebrations, they were toasting heroes and ancestors, and they were bringing all that to the forefront. And that was the right time of year to do it, because the barriers between the worlds were a little thinner, right? So you could, talking about the heroes and the gods meant maybe just a little bit more, was a little bit more impactful.
That's all fascinating, and of course this entire Yule time is, like you say, just one of those things, and I don't know exactly why it's carried on to this day, other than it's just so symbolically meaningful and symbolically charged that way, and that we've been celebrating something like this for a very long time, whether it's through Christmas with the Judeo-Christian trappings and all that, or whether it was before that as Yule, or if you were from further south, more the solstice, the Saturnalia, any of that. It's all fascinating to see. And you mentioned the Wild Hunt, and that's another one of those fun traditions that is associated with Yule, but it's also got a lot of interesting features that are associated with what we now have as Halloween or All Saints Day. And that's really interesting there too, because when you're mentioning the timing of all this and the feasts, and it comes kind of after where we have some of the traditional solstice, that this stuff would come after the traditional solstice. We also have traditions where it's unclear whether they were originally associated with this Halloween that we have now. And I'll get into a bit about why, but also because they would have been a little bit closer to the end of the harvest. That seems to be one of the demarcations of the year other than the solstice. So that seems to be why there are certain traditions that could be attributed to both the Yule time, which, as we've heard just now, it can be solstice proper or just after the solstice, up to a month after the solstice, or a little bit before, when they would have started to gather up, the harvest for the year. And the Wild Hunt is one of these traditions. And so when the end of the harvest is happening, not only are any last agricultural products being harvested, because they're not going to grow, they're all going to die, and you need to have enough to live on through these coldest, darkest months. So that's why the harvest is kind of a big deal, and could be a demarcation line in terms of the year, similar to possibly the solstice. But it's also, I think, maybe more accurate to say, and I'm not really getting this from anything scholarly, but it starts this liminal period where the harvest has ended, and now they can't do anything until the end of the winter. So the winter itself is kind of this, it's not necessarily outside of time, but it's certainly outside of the productive time, where they would have been where the people of Northern Europe would have been reliant on the cycles of the harvest, planting and then growing and then harvesting at the end of the year. That's all there. But then the other end of the cycle is Yule. It's winter. It's darkness. And so the end of the harvest, and this would have actually traveled depending on where you were latitude wise, but it would be when winter is starting to pick up. They would have just, okay, that's it. That's the end of the harvest. They also would have sacrificed any of their animals that wouldn't have made it to the end of winter. And when I say sacrificed, I should have said, that was a slip of the tongue. I should have said butchered, but I believe they would have sacrificed them, though, because that is a ritual act, and a ritual act like that wouldn't be undertaken in mundane space. It would be sacred. It would be an act that they would revere, because they want to have those animals be prosperous again, whether it's through some idea of rebirth or just, let the herd grow, please, and survive the winter. Like if your cattle herd gets completely wiped out in winter, that's going to be very hard to recover from. So, but the point there is that they kill all these animals, and they've got all this meat, and so that's just ripe for harvesting, right? So that's just all there to eat, and that's going to be everything that you eat over this months long time of festivities. And so Yule is certainly included there, but the process starts at the end of the harvest. So to the Wild Hunt, we know about the Wild Hunt mostly through collections of folklore, and most famously through Jakob Grimm's his Germanic mythology treatise, which is just a a massive, massive book. I actually might have gotten the name of that wrong now that I think about it. His book, it's Teutonic mythology, something like that. I think it's one of those. But Jakob Grimm, and if you don't know, he's actually part of the Brothers Grimm, as in where we get all of the cool fairy tales that have been heavily sanitized and turned into Disney movies, a lot of them, or into nursery rhymes or children's stories, things like that. But the original Brothers Grimm stories were actually quite dark because they did not sanitize them, and they very much had to deal with a lot of dark themes. And it's worth checking out some of the original Grimm fairy tales. Maybe we'll cover them kind of on their own one day. But his other profession, Jakob Grimm, was he was a linguist, and he did a lot of great work with the linguistics of the Germanic languages, and German in particular. And there's a law describing the sound shifts in German from Old Germanic to Modern German, and it's referred to as Grimm's law. And I'm not going to go into detail on that, but he did some big things, and that was one area where he was a major player there. But he also went and collected as many folk tales and as many things about religion of the pre-Christian peoples of Germany that he could find. And so he is probably the best source on non-Scandinavian Germanic traditions that we really have, because although there are others such as Tacitus who sort of secondhand went through some of the beliefs and things kind of at the time, Grimm was very, very detailed and thorough. Like these books are massive. These books are gigantic, and yeah, it's quite the read to get through any of it. I've only ever used this book as kind of like a reference, because in this day and age, Google Books, you can kind of search anything, but some of the most obscure references to certain gods and things like that are only found in these old books, and so you find a reference to a particular god or story or something like that in his book, and then you see like what little bit he wrote on it, and sometimes he goes into great detail about the exact etymology of the words, things like that, and that's just a lot of fun. But he's a great source, and the Wild Hunt is documented there in his book, in his big book there, and he goes into some of the names for the Wild Hunt and the purposes of the Wild Hunt. But in Old Middle German, this would have been known as something like Odin's army or Odin's horde. So Wotan's hair is the proper name for it that was written down. And in later terms, it's also something like the furious army or wütende Heer, or in more modern German, just straight the Wild Hunt or the wilde Jagd. And yeah, so the names though are just they're telling, right? So first of all, associating it directly with Odin, this does kind of put into, because you might have realized I haven't really gotten into what the Wild Hunt is, and that's the hard part, is that since we only have some of these folklore ideas based around it, we don't know exactly what the Wild Hunt would have meant in every context, but we're getting some clues from the name and from the time of year and some of the traditions, and I don't want to say superstitions, but that's accurate enough, that go along with it. But so here with some of the names, so first of all, we're seeing it's attributed directly to Odin, and in Scandinavia there's other names that are basically the same things, like Odin's Hunt or the Terrifying Ride, so Odin's Jagd in general Scandinavian, which it isn't really a thing. I guess you could say Proto-Norse or Old Norse, but the Terrifying Ride as well is another name for it in Scandinavian sources. And so it's, first of all, it's great that we have Germanic through Grimm and Scandinavian sources on what this might actually be, because it shows that this would have been throughout Germanic culture from a particular point. Certainly before the northern groups started to split off from the continental groups, which is pretty cool. That's a long time ago. That's over 1,000 years ago for sure. More like over 1,500 years ago, 2,000 years ago. So it's pretty cool that is there kind of throughout, and we have more than one source to kind of say something about it. Okay, so with the names and the attestations, because it's important that we have them, and that was really all my point about Grimm, was that he wrote this stuff down, and so we owe him quite the debt for having done this. We know it existed, but what exactly is it? And so a lot of the ideas surrounding it are something to do with that if you were caught in the Wild Hunt, like the Wild Hunt is going to be this great horde or army of warriors. It could be ancestors as well, but certainly it's led by either Odin, or in some of the Germanic sources, they actually attribute this to other heroes such as Perta or Holda or Holla. There's a variety of variations on these names, but they are attested as possible leaders of the Wild Hunt. But in Scandinavia, it's Odin. And Odin, well, we're familiar with Odin, and certainly Dan's gone into a little bit, his inspiration, his ecstasy, all that. And for this being the time of year of darkness, of where it's the most dangerous to be outside, right? The Wild Hunt, I think it really symbolizes all of that collective danger of being outside, being out in the unknown at this time of darkness. And, if you get caught outside, maybe you get swept away. There's stories or ideas of, maybe you get swept from one location to another. Like you find yourself in a location that you didn't know how you got there, something like that. And maybe that's something like, if you're freezing half to death sort of thing, and you're just wandering wildly and someone finds you and, gets you back to health sort of thing, that would, maybe that'd be one explanation for it. But, who knows, right? The Wild Hunt might've got you. And also I think there's the risk of death to the Wild Hunt as well, which is not, no joke. It's not a joke. And so, although we lack some of the specifics of what the Wild Hunt actually would have meant to people and how they would have acknowledged it, it is important to kind of note that it's the culmination of all of these ideas about chaos and the underworld, and bleeding into the world as we know it now. And that's why this is associated with some of things like Halloween or All Saints Day, because that is really the festival where we have remnants of that idea of the world of the dead bleeding into the world of the living. And that's right at the end of the harvest, at least in certain latitudes of Europe. And so the idea that we have this Wild Hunt, it's actually unclear whether this would have been specifically only related to Yule, or whether this would have been for the entire period of winter sort of thing. And I think that's more likely if this is being associated with a time that sort of starts with the end of the harvest and ends with spring. Then we've got quite a big period of time where basically Odin is ruling the skies, and it's dangerous to go outside, because that's true. That you can still freeze to death if you go wandering outside in the winter. Like it happens. Just to show my little bits of black metal trivia, popular band Windeer, the single member of the band, because that's often how it is with black metal, is that it's just one guy, but Arnthor, he went out from his parents' cabin for a walk, or he was going to his parents' cabin, something like that, and he froze to death in the woods, and they found his body like a few days later. Like it happens even to residents of rural Norway. It still happens, even though I think they would still know that the winter's a little bit of a difficult place to be in rural Norway. So anyway, that's all to say here that this is a period of time where the world of the living and the world of the dead, it's blurred. And that gets into, again, the symbolic idea of just how chaotic it is, and that it's the darkest time of the year, and the timing of it all as well. It's interesting. It just shows how they would have viewed the winter kind of in that whole time. And I'll leave this with a little bit about how one way we know that Odin is associated with Yule specifically as well is because one of his by names is, of course, Yolnir, which is something like master of Yule. And interestingly, there is a Finnish name for Odin, Jauloherra, which literally translated would be something like your Lord of Yule. So, and that's attributed to Odin as well. And so it's interesting that there's names like that have kind of crossed cultures, although it's not surprising because they were in such close proximity. And I will say as well that a lot of this information, you can find more about this from the Norse Mythology for Smart People page on the Wild Hunt. I got a lot of this information from there, and I would have I would have gone and grabbed from a lot of other different sources, except he has a pretty darn well collected grouping of basically everything relevant on the Wild Hunt, and I couldn't find anything that wasn't also listed there. So there's that. So if it sounds like I'm just summarizing that one page, it's basically because it was such a well put together collection of all the best sources we have on the Wild Hunt.
That is a great website. It might be my favorite for information about Norse mythology, and he's got great books. I can't think of his name off the top. Something Dan McCoy, something like that.
Yeah.
He's got two great books that really, like for me, if you want to understand sort of the pre-Christian mindset, and sort of like animism. Like his book Love of Destiny really like solidified that in my mind, as well as like cyclical time versus linear. So no, very smart guy, and he's a scholar, like he's legit professor in this type of thing. So can't recommend that enough. And while you're talking, it made me think of the one of the traditions that's kind of gone by the wayside is just around Christmas is telling ghost stories. And even one of the most famous Christmas ghost stories, Christmas Carol. Like, yeah, it's all about like that time where it's a little, things are the barriers between the worlds are a little thinner or whatever, and you can get that. So yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah, it's a great. Well, first of all, the website is great, and the entire researching this topic. Not that we didn't know little bits about this whole thing about Yule, the Wild Hunt before, but really digging into the sources and all that, it's a lot of fun, and definitely helpful that there's resources like Norse mythology for smart people. There's others, of course, but this happened to be very good for the Wild Hunt.
Absolutely. So shall I talk about one of my favorite things?
Let's do it.
I do love the Wild Hunt. That is one of my favorite things, but I am not currently wearing a Wild Hunt sweater. I am, however, wearing a Krampus sweater if you're watching on YouTube. And on the back of my sweater, I probably won't get up and spin around, but there's a delightful picture of Krampus beating children with sticks. I think there's some chains involved as well, and his tongue is out because he's going to eat them. So I do have a lot of love for Krampus. And the reason why is that, he's pretty cool, and he kind of adds that oomph to Christmas and this time of year that, at least in North America, I think we've kind of lost, because, if you're a kid and you're naughty and you're on the naughty list, Santa in North America will bring you a lump of coal. And that's not that bad, really. Like you can set that on fire, but it's also has a certain amount of worth in the market. Like, it might not be, the latest toy, but it's not, it could be a lot worse. So we've kind of gotten off easy in North America. In Central Europe and Northern Europe, they have Krampus. And Krampus is literally just a demon that He's got goat hooves and horns and a prehensile tongue that just goes wherever it wants. And he actually works with Santa. They're buds. And if you've been good, then Santa will bring you gifts, and I think like oranges and like fruit and good things for kids, candy, that kind of thing. But if you've been bad, Krampus will come. He will beat you with a stick, shove you in his sack, and carry you away off into the night, never to be seen again. And I mean, we don't know this for sure, but it's reported that he will eat them. So, well, and I think it makes me think, we've got Elf on the Shelf, like, oh, be good because Elf on the Shelf's watching. But, they've actually got like Krampus who will kill you and eat you. And actually there's a great video of Christoph Waltz, the actor, explaining to Jimmy Fallon who Krampus is, because Christoph Waltz is from that area of the world and had that tradition. And so how would one celebrate Krampus? So they've got a night called Krampusnacht. Krampus night really is what it translates to. And it usually happens about the 5th or 6th of December, which is when they celebrate, it's right around when they celebrate St. Nicholas. And they have these crazy things called the Krampus Run. And people dress up like Krampus. So, like, check this out on YouTube. Just Google Krampus. You will see people in these incredible costumes that would put any cosplayer at Comic-Con to shame, because they look like truly demonic. And it's kind of like a Santa Claus parade where you have people lined up behind barricades watching this. And these people dressed like Krampus run through the streets usually with torches, and they're hitting kids. They're terrorizing them. And it's all in good fun, but it goes right to that line where you're like, this is like a little uncomfortable, at least from, our sanitized modern sensibilities. But I mean, the kids are having fun, and like you'll see parents like offering their kids up and that kind of thing so they can participate in this bizarre, awesome ritual. And so part of it is, and we've talked about this a lot, I think one of the themes for this episode will be how dangerous the winter is, because it is. And we've that black metal fellow, he froze to death. Whenever there's a bad cold snap in Canada in the major cities, like the homeless population will take a hit for sure, as well. Like people who I don't know if they still do this, but it wasn't that long ago that they did. Like if you were behind on your power bill and got your power shut off, like it wasn't unknown that someone would freeze to death in their apartment. I think within the last 10, 15 years, they passed a law saying that you couldn't shut power off during the winter, but because it's that important, And this is, if the Wild Hunt might be a little too much for, little Johnny and little Susie, Krampus is certainly the right speed. They're going to behave. They're going to listen to their parents. They're not going to go out at night and wander around because Krampus might be there. And, they're not going to fight with each other because they want the good stuff from Santa, but also they don't want to get eaten by Krampus. So it's, for me, I just love it because it adds that oomph to Christmas. It's like, you better be good because, you won't get a gift from Santa. Well, who cares? Like, chances are you are going to get a gift from Santa. But no, if you've got Krampus on the other side, well, not to get too serious on this, but it's like when you're setting goals, you don't just want to set a goal for like what you want to be. You need to set the dangers. Okay, if I don't do this, this is what my life will look like. You need heaven and hell, right? So, and Krampus is, sort of takes up the slack on the hell part in a big way. And I think we're seeing a bit of a resurgence in Krampus, especially in North America, where we are seeing Krampus runs here and there, and especially places that were settled by more Central European peoples. They seem to be bringing the tradition back. So it's one of my favorite things about Christmas when I learned about it. So yeah.
That's wonderful. And it segues perfectly into some of the Finnic Yule traditions, or Finnish proper, if we're being specific, because I only really dug into some of the specifically Finnish Yule traditions. But since we've been covering Kalevala, and that's been a whole lot of fun, we figured we would touch on some of the specific traditions to the Finnish peoples, and they certainly have something like Yule, but that's probably also because of the close cultural proximity to the Germanics. And the thing about it is there's a lot of similarities. So first of all, their Santa Claus is actually called Joulupukki, which means Yule Buck. And if you're noticing a similarity right there, with Krampus being this big goat man sort of thing, well, it seems like that was pretty much the same in the Finnish traditions, where they had this goat figure who would go around, and in its most tame, when these traditions actually kind of went around, the Joulupukki, or there's other names for it, such as Nuutipukki, which came from Saint Knut, and Saint Knut's Day is right around this time of year, and so Nuutipukki, and he would go around and demand gifts, and it flipped. The script kind of flipped to Santa Claus, or Joulupukki, would go around and give children gifts, and this would actually be during the day. Probably later in the day, but still during daylight hours when everyone would be, actually, depending on your latitude, there might not have been any daylight at the time. But that's got to be above a certain degree there, but everyone would still be awake. The parents would open the door, and the children would say nice things. There's a couple of canned phrases that the children would say, or that Santa would say, and Santa would give gifts. And this would even be this would be a person would dress up as Joulupukki and go through the village or the town and do this. And this would have been one of their traditions for a while there. But the older Krampus origins or similarities were certainly there. And some of the reasoning behind why this was a goat in the first place is kind of interesting. The goat is associated mostly with Thor in the Norse traditions, and an idea there is that Thor would have been kind of the protector at this time of year, and so they would have associated him with that. Perhaps that's it's a theory, but I don't think we have like a real reason why the goat specifically would have been chosen for this time of year. I certainly didn't find one when looking into all this, but nowadays we certainly have the remnant of that in Finland, is that their Santa Claus is the Yule Buck. They actually have made this into a whole big kind of tourism thing. In Finland, he's said to live in Korvatunturi, or Ear Hill, or Ear Mountain, and it's this mountain in Lapland, very, very north in Finland, and it's shaped a little bit like an ear. And the idea is Santa Claus, or Joulupukki, can hear everything that's going on from all the children around the world from his home in Korvatunturi, but it's a little hard to get to. And so they made it a little more accessible, and Santa Claus basically also lives in the city of Rovaniemi, which is the capital of its region over in Lapland, and it's the closest airport to. I'm sure there's other very, very small airports, but there's a whole Santa Claus village, and the city plan of Rovaniemi is actually based on like a reindeer. I'm not making this up. This was actually the city was destroyed near the end of World War II because the Nazis were around in Finland, and they were both fighting against the Soviets during the later stages of World War II. But after the things started to turn around and everything, one of the conditions for Finland not being just completely wiped off the map and eaten by the Soviet Union was that they kicked out the Nazis. And so as a part of their retreat, they ended up razing the city of Rovaniemi to the ground, like completely destroying it. I'm talking like almost everything. All buildings were completely destroyed. And so it was rebuilt by the architect Alvar Aalto, and he planned the city, and he decided that the soccer stadium in Rovaniemi, which either still existed or was being built to purpose, something like that, was going to be like this eye. And from that eye was going to be all the streets were going to have an appearance from above of reindeer, like the antlers on a reindeer. And so that's where Santa Claus lives, or at least that's kind of his semi-temporary home, is kind of there in the area around Rovaniemi, or more properly in Korvatunturi, which is again quite hard to get to and quite hard to. So they gave Santa kind of an alternate home for him to live, and they get quite a bit of tourism out of that, for them claiming that that's the home of Santa Claus. Now, the whole thing about this joulupukki, or Yule buck, is that this isn't necessarily the original traditions in Finland or with the Finnic peoples, but there is a festival that we know a little bit about because it's maintained its place in some, not necessarily all areas of Finland, but in some areas of Finland, this is still celebrated, and I believe it's certainly known about in Finland in general. But it was called kekri, or keuri, or keuri. I've seen a bunch of different spellings, and I believe that's just really where you are from regionally. There's a lot of different regional accents and things in Finland, but this was the name of a Finnish fertility god who specifically dealt with the protection of cattle. And this is interesting because we've also seen Ukon Juhla, which was the feast of Ukko, which would have been kind of at the height of the harvest sort of thing. And the festival was actually essentially named for Ukko, but then you have this other one named for Kekri. And so this whole harvest, the end of harvest, is named for Kekri. And this would have been a massive feast, first of all, and a remembrance of the dead. And so this is celebrated kind of jointly with what they call Pyhäinpäivä in Finland, which translates to Saints' Day, essentially, or All Saints' Day. It would be the equivalent of Halloween. And this is all there kind of at the same time. So this Kekri is considered the best that we understand for an equivalent of Yule, the Yuletide, the New Year, prior to the advent of Christianity. And of course, once Christianity comes in and they've kind of changed some of the names around, the word for Christmas in Finnish is joulu, as in joulupukki or Julebuck. But where they got that from was directly from the word Yule. It's a direct borrowing. The thing about that, though, is that it's likely an older borrowing than Christianity would have even been involved in. It's likely a borrowing from older Proto-Norse. One thing about Finnish is that it's an incredibly conservative language. When it borrows a word in, often it doesn't change for a very long time. Like its word for king, kuningas, that is essentially the Proto-Germanic form of the word for king. And it hasn't changed for possibly thousands of years since it came through. And so the form of the word, joulu, this is likely quite old in sort of the time frame of Old Norse. And so it's likely that either Christianity was just being introduced or it wasn't even introduced when this word was borrowed. And it would have just meant something like a party or a feast. And even and one of the biggest reasons why this kind of all clicks and makes sense is that the modern Finnish word for party, juhla, or festival, something like that, is just a newer borrowing of the same Germanic word. And so this is all coming from the same meaning, the same root word. And the word for Yule that we have now is of course all from this original Germanic root. And this would have just all referred to party or festivities. And Yule proper is just the plural form of that original word. So it's even like the festivities is Yule. And so seeing that kind of going all at once in this entire region, whether it's in Old Norse or whether it's in Finnish, they seem to have this common idea that Yule, or the time around Yule, it's all just about this party, this festivities. And so the similarities here, the cultural cross borrowings, things like that. Because who knows if some of this was borrowed in the other direction. It looks like most of this came from Germanic into Finnic, but the similarities and the celebration of the harvest and then the Yule time being the darkest time of the year, that all seems to be in common. And well, it just shows that there's common, similar ideas about how to handle months on end of very little light or even no light, depending on where exactly you're from, and where the winter is just brutal and hard to live in and hard to survive in. And how do you do that? Well, let's have this big party, and let's have something at the end of the harvest. Let's celebrate that. Let's honor this fertility god who protects the cattle. Let's go and have this figure of this Yule buck who's going to keep children kind of towing the line there, whether it's Krampus or it's Joulupukki or what. And the entire thing is just Yule is a special time of year, and our Yule special is being released just shortly after the traditional Yule times. We actually intended this to be released kind of right in the middle here, but minor illness got in the way, and it happens. But we're still firmly within the Yule timing, and certainly if based on what Dan said here, we're maybe even a little bit early from the timing where Yule technically would have taken place if we're going off of a lunar calendar. And so, yeah, the whole thing is just fascinating. And that's all I have on Yule, whether it's the Finnish traditions, the Wild Hunt, or any of that in general.
Yeah, it's just such a neat time of year to see that it's been celebrated for so long, in like just getting like having the biggest party you can imagine, and drinking until you can't drink anymore, and eating and feasting and all that kind of stuff. Like they're really embracing the darkness and the chaos. And I was thinking why don't we have that in North America as much? And then I remembered the Puritans, when they first came over, they actually banned Christmas for a few years because they didn't want any of that craziness going on, because it was a crazy time, and maybe it's coming back a little bit with craziness, but there's definitely something about the time of year. So
there is, absolutely. And I think we're taking this time of year as well to recap what an amazing year 2018 has been for us. And I think first we're going to start out with some acknowledgments of people who have helped us out over the course of this great year. And if you don't know, we launched we a very soft launch in February of 2018. So we recorded our first episodes in January. And so as far as we're concerned, the show has been a 2018 project that really, really got started early on in 2018. So this has really been a full year of us making the Northern Myths podcast, and it's been quite a time, quite a ride. Certainly a lot more successful than I think we ever anticipated. I mean, we're on track by the end of 2018, December 31st, to have 170,000 downloads in that time. Like that's mind-boggling for us on 33 episodes. Like that's amazing, and we really, really can't thank you enough. You and everyone who has helped us out get to this point. It's really just mind blowing that you like listening to us talk about all these obscure things and our interesting theories about order and chaos and the archetypes, and none of that is our original ideas. By the way, of course, we have to mention that we're. I think we've made almost every episode at some point we acknowledge that we are not experts by any means, and these ideas aren't ours originally, but we've had a lot of fun applying archetypal ideas to these stories. And well, thank you for joining us, because that's it's been just amazing to get to share this with so many people. And I think for acknowledgments here, the best place for us to start, I think, is with all the guests we've had on this year, because that covers quite a lot of great people and some great folks who have helped us and supported us a lot throughout this whole process here. And I think the best way to tackle that is just chronologically, since they've been on, because I don't think there's a fairer way of approaching that. And so just to start off with here, a big thank you to Noah Tetzner, the host of History of Vikings. Thank you very much for getting in touch in the first place. It was really, really cool to see someone else who was in the podcasting community. We certainly saw your show kind of cropping up around the same time ours did, but it was just really amazing that you found our show and you liked it, and you've been a big help with us throughout getting started. You certainly have a better grasp at how social media works and everything, and definitely gave us a boost. And we loved having you on our show. Loved coming on History of Vikings. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I hope we'll be talking to him in the new year.
Definitely. And then next was Siobhan Clark, author of Children of Midgard, and now host of the new Myths, Legends, and Lore podcast, which we certainly highly recommend. She's doing some great stuff there. But Siobhan, thank you. You're one of the first people to reach out to us, and it was just really, really awesome to get some great feedback and to hear that you like the show. It was great getting to talk to you about your book and so much more. We've had some great discussions both on the show and off, and hoping to get you back on again to talk about your podcast.
Yeah, that'd be great. The podcast is great, and we definitely recommend it. She just finished up the Saga of the Volsung, so definitely check that out. That's a great story.
Absolutely. And then next was Professor Carolyne Larrington, who you might know from her translation of the Poetic Edda, which is certainly where I found out about her initially. She's also got some other fantastic books, including some fun stuff about the Game of Thrones, which is definitely cool and adjacent certainly to all this all the Norse stuff that she's known for. But thank you, Professor Larrington, for a great discussion, great conversation, lots of interesting things. You're certainly an expert where we are not. So thank you for coming on the show.
Absolutely. And I remember when we were first doing this, she was actually our first audience member, because we'd asked if we could, if she'd mind if we used her translation of the Poetic Edda. And, she wanted to check us out, make sure we weren't crazy, at least not in a bad way. I mean, we are crazy. We're talking about like the Poetic Edda and poems for hours on end. That is crazy. But yeah, so she checked it out, and she was very encouraging. She said, our enthusiasm was clear, and that we had her blessing to move forward. So we were, that was actually pretty big for us, because we had no idea, we were just starting out. We had barely told our wives about this. We're just doing this thing. We're just hanging out. And then, Professor Larrington was quite encouraging of it.
Definitely. And we didn't end up getting the proper licensing figured out with Oxford Publishing, which, is a serious, proper publishing house with a gigantic bureaucracy, and we didn't get a response. But as we'll cover later, we have ended up going with Jackson Crawford's translation through Hackett Publishing. But those were the two. Those were the two that we were wanting to find out if we could cover, because no matter which one we used, we thought they were going to be good and accessible and easy to read. And we use Dr. Larrington's translation as sort of a comparison tool to Dr. Crawford's, because we don't speak Old Norse or anything like that. I can't read it. So, we're going off of the translations and their accuracy and all that. And it makes it a lot easier to have more than one good one at hand, to be able to just see a different wording or different way of parsing out the Old Norse, because just a different way of seeing it written down can help make more sense of it, right? So, but we highly recommend Professor Carolyne Larrington's translation of the Poetic Edda, and thank you again, Professor Larrington, for a great discussion.
Absolutely.
And then next up was Tuomas Rounakari, also known as Shaman Violin of the folk metal band Korpiklani. It was an amazing conversation we had, and all your stories about the Hanti people and about laments and all just everything that we covered was really great. We had the honor of organizing the pagan workshop when Korpiklani came to Calgary, and just had a great time getting to know you a little bit better and hanging out. Thank you very much for being on the show and letting us kind of be a part of everything that you're doing, which is just wonderful and fantastic. And that pagan workshop was something else, and I hope we get to talk about that on a future discussion with Tuomas one day.
Oh, definitely. We've gotten incredible feedback. People are telling me that it like literally blew their minds, like changed them. So no, it was quite the experience.
As a very long time fan of Korpiklani, that was definitely one of the big moments where I was a little bit starstruck a little bit for a moment there, of course. But Tuomas, you were gracious, and it was a great conversation, and we were very happy to get to organize the workshop when you're around. And obviously, if you're ever back in Calgary, the door is always open with
Absolutely.
us. So, yeah, that was a really great one. And not to sound more enthusiastic about that. That was just because I was a very long time Korpiklani fan, and we may or may not have played a lot of Korpiklani at my wedding and things like that. So, yeah, that was just a big deal for me. Next up was Erik Schumacher, author of Hakan's Saga. And that was a great discussion. We ended up talking about not only your book, the books about Hakan the Good, who we talked about here, having an influence on Yule and things like that, but your take on the archetypes and everything. That was a great conversation, and definitely a great addition to our show. And so thank you for coming on.
Absolutely, yeah. It's always awesome to see how the archetypes get used sort of in like even modern storytelling, right? Like they're not these things that we have to look into the past for. Like they're ever present in our storytelling, and the good storytellers know how to use them. So it was great to talk to a good storyteller.
Absolutely. And then next up was Fjörn the Skald of Fjörn's Hall, both the blog and the podcast. Another podcast that's started up since we got going there. And another great conversation. Fjörn is another one of those folks who I would describe as an expert where we are not. He's an academic and digs into a lot of this stuff on a much greater level, in a much more scholarly manner than we ever have. But we were happy to get to talk to Fjörn, and thank you very much for coming on our show. And And certainly, we encourage you to take a look at Fjern's blog and podcast because they're both great resources. His podcast, he covers a lot of kind of really more obscure stories, I think, that are really interesting and definitely haven't been covered so much in a lot of others. So yeah, definitely worth checking out.
Yeah, he's one of the people that I find myself getting jealous of in a really good way because, like, on social media or whatever, he'll post a link to an article or, say something. I'm just like, man, that is interesting. Like, I had no idea. Like, even when he was talking to us, he talked to us about cheese, right? And it was fascinating. Like, I love his stuff. Can't get enough. Yeah, definitely check him out.
Definitely. Next up was a special one for us, and this was certainly the guest that was least in keeping with the themes that we have going here, but I think we did a good job of tying it back. We were absolutely honored to have Jocko Willink and Leif Babin on our show to talk about their book, The Dichotomy of Leadership, on the day it was released, too, no less. And that was just quite the moment for us because Jocko and Leif have been some of the most influential people for us in the last few years, just on a personal level, on a level of personal growth it was almost surreal. I mean, they're best-selling authors, and I mean, even just on that practical level, that's quite something. But honestly, we had almost no business getting to talk to them, so it was truly an honor to get to speak with them, hear a little bit about their book, and then of course afterwards we talked a little bit about how we tie that into our own lives and to the show a little bit there. So if you haven't taken a look at the work of Jocko Willink and Leif Babin, yeah, check it out. We're huge fans and can't recommend it enough.
Yeah, I mean, what can you say that one, just I never thought I'd actually talk to either of them just because why would our paths cross at all? And there's a little bit like you're talking about with Thomas, that starstruck nature, right? Like, this is these are two men who are former Navy SEALs, and Leif not so much. He's been on Jocko's podcast like a whole bunch of times, but on like Jocko's podcast, it comes out weekly. I know we listen weekly, so it's interesting being able to talk to someone that, not to put too fine a point, but it's kind of like one of your heroes, right? Like, and they say not to meet him, but it was awesome. Like we had a good time. And it was also like one of those times where I'm definitely going to look back and be like, this is when we made it. And maybe that, like, if you're listening and you don't know who they are, like that's not like a big thing to you. But I know for me, like, I keep thinking back, I'm like, wow, like because of the podcast, I got to talk to them. Like that's something. That's something that, like, if we were to stop today, I'd carry that and be like, man, I got to talk to them.
Yeah. Again, not to diminish any of our other guests or any of the other folks who have helped or supported us. It's just that they're so incredibly successful and deserve to be deservedly. And the Jocko podcast is interesting and unique in its own right. And their books are just fantastic. And that's really just it for me, was that the books that Jocko and Leif put out, first of all, the one that they had out previously, Extreme Ownership, and then The Dichotomy of Leadership, which they released and we talked to them about. Yeah, the Extreme Ownership book originally was just a fantastic book for me and has helped me to grow and develop. And so it was just that these were, Jocko and Leif are a big deal for us, and we didn't think we'd ever get to talk to them. So that the fact that happened was quite something. So thank you, Jocko and Leif, for coming on the show, and you're always welcome on again if you'd like to continue the discussion.
Absolutely.
Next, we were visited by Dr. Jackson Crawford, and that was another great conversation. And as you know, Jackson Crawford's is the translation that we read on the show. And so thank you, first of all, to him and to Hackett Publishing for letting us do that. Hackett Publishing actually responded to our emails. So that was something. But no, they've graciously let us use Dr. Crawford's translation, and that's been fantastic. And he provided us with his blessing as well. And then we ended up having an amazing conversation, just a great conversation about, first of all, his translation process, which was really cool. Me as a kind of language nerd, that was a lot of fun. And just everything about how he sees the popularity of all this being, and it's his YouTube channel is great, definitely worth checking out, because lots of great resources about Norse mythology and translations and things like that. And he's got a lot of great other books. He's translating a whole bunch of sagas, the prose Edda. He just released as well the Poetic Edda, narrated by him as well. So that's definitely all worth checking out.
Oh, definitely. And if you haven't seen the episode or any of his videos, he would have his voice is perfect for it. Like it'd be a great listen. Highly recommend it. And really, in a lot of ways, like without Hackett Publishing and Jackson Crawford, like we wouldn't be doing this, or we'd be using like the old like Bellows or Chisholm, and it would be, vowels and weird combinations of sort of English, but with Old Norse like diction, and it's a hard read and not immediately apparent what it means when you listen to it.
We've even had similar trouble with our Call of Allah translation. Like, it's readable, but it's archaic too. Like we lucked out that there is one for the Call of Allah that is freely available, but also like not too bad as far as that stuff goes. But that just really isn't the case for the Poetic Edda. The translations that are in the public domain are not nearly as good as some of the ones that have been produced recently, such as Dr. Crawford. So
yeah, so it's just it's great to be able to use the translation and in some ways like work with him. And he came on, and having him explain the translation process was amazing, because he was really trying to get that balance between what the Norse says and not just like directly mapping that into English, which would kind of be awkward, but captured some of the meaning and make it meaningful for modern English readers. So it was fascinating to hear about that and the examples he gave. Like, it was great, and I'm sure we'll talk to him again, hopefully like several times.
Exactly. Always welcome back on, Dr. Crawford. Thank you very much for coming on our show and letting us use your translation. It's definitely been a big part of our success, I think. So. And after that, we had Harry Jonsson of Tyr on, another band that I'm a longtime fan of. I think I was starting to get a little less starstruck all the time after Tuomas, Jocko, Jackson Crawford. It started to be we're maybe a little more comfortable, but I shouldn't say that. Everyone we're talking to here is much cooler and much more successful than we are. So every single time is different. We're just getting a little more accustomed to it, something like that. But
maybe better at hiding our either giddiness or nervousness. That might be it.
Exactly. And so so Harry, it was great to talk to Harry. Great to hear about all the inspiration for his music, and some really fun details about specific lyrics and things like that I wanted to know about. And it was just great to talk to Harry. And thank you for coming on the show, Harry. It was great to talk to you, and big long time fan. So it was great to get to have that conversation.
Yeah, it was a fascinating talk, and I really got from him that the myths aren't something that, and the lessons of the myths aren't just things that happened in the past or like old stories. Like, you can carry those lessons and those myths forward and do interesting things with them, like write songs and sort of express everyday things through that like mythic language and that kind of thing. So that was it was awesome to see someone who is kind of still living out like a mytho-poetic life. Like, it was awesome.
It was a lot of fun. And if you don't know, Harry is from the Faroe Islands. So he was able to give us a great perspective on a lot of the traditions that are kind of unique to the Faroe Islands too, which is, a small island chain of 50,000 people, but still has its own unique cultural contributions, which was super cool. After that, we and this is our final, most recent interview. We had Einar Selvik of Wardruna on the show, and that I think has gone over as one of the best interviews we've done. It's certainly the most popular, actually, in terms of just the total number of views and downloads, and then maybe that's due to Einar's current popularity with Wardruna and all that. It was coinciding with the release of their Skald album, which is just a wonderful, we listen to it every day here at my house, and it's all Einar with like one instrument and just him singing kind of like more like an a cappella kind of thing, really, compared to the large arrangements of the other Wardruna albums. But it's all fantastic stuff, and just getting to talk to him was amazing. The topics of conversation started off, kind of like, the inspiration for his music and things like that, but got into like the esoteric stuff that he explores and deals with. And yeah, that was quite the conversation. And even it, not just for his profile lately and Wardruna's popularity, which is well deserved, and we're huge fans. It's also like that was a conversation that went in such a direction. It was something else, and it was an honor to get to be a part of that. To be honest, that was one of those things where it's like, yeah, I'm amazed that we're here getting to talk to such an awesome person who's got amazing ideas about, well, the sorts of things we discussed. And so, all of these guests were wonderful, and the interviews were great. And if you haven't listened to them, and we haven't convinced you to listen to them just based on our little recaps and thank yous here, go check them out. This latest one with Einar was, I think, the most unique out of all of them, as just far as where the conversation went.
Yeah, it was fascinating, and it went, like you're saying, went in a kind of like a deeply esoteric direction that, you don't have to believe in like Harry Potter magic to see the impact and the only word I can think of is like magic. There was magic there in his descriptions of how he comes up with his songs and how he's inspired and all that kind of stuff. And kind of a glimpse into, well, I guess one particular artist's method of creation. So it was quite something to be a part of.
Absolutely. And we've since taken a little bit of a break from interviews. Just the holiday time is a little bit busy, and then suddenly not busy. And we've been taking a nice rest. And then, of course, minor illness kind of worked its way in there. But we hope to have some great interviews in 2019 as well. And, well, every single one of our guests is welcome back on too, because it was just all great conversations. And we'd be honored to have any of them back on again.
Absolutely. At this point, it'd be like seeing old friends, right? So yeah, it'd be great to talk to any of these wonderful guests.
Exactly. And so a huge thank you to them, because I think that really, I mean, on a practical level, I think that helped us, get in front of a lot of new people who wouldn't have given our show a look without, being introduced through one of these great guests. But also it added something fantastic to our show, because our concept is very particular in what we cover, with the Poetic Edda, with the Kalevala, with all that, and eventually we hope to cover some sagas, maybe even branch out to other mythologies. Like we've got no end of these stories we can learn about, but we also are really trying to dig into the root of mythology and why it is so important, and what the philosophical contribution of these stories is, and hearing these perspectives through our guests and the conversations we've had, that adds a new layer. And it's certainly given me some lines of thinking that I wouldn't have approached otherwise, because when it's just the two of us, like we think very similarly a lot of the time and have a lot of the same ideas. We bounce off each other really well, and that's awesome. But the addition of a third or fourth or 10th new perspective into what this is, what we're doing, I think has enriched this show. And I hope you'll agree.
Yeah, exactly. The amount of times that we've talked to someone and my mind has been blown, like legitimately, like, wow, I couldn't have come up with that idea on my own in a million years. Like, I just kind of expect it now when we go into interviews. I'm just like, I'm ready to have my mind blown because they're going to say something that I had no idea about before.
Exactly. And so, yeah, I think if we didn't kind of get into this, I don't think the show would have gotten to where we are and been and had the level of success we've had, not on just a practical level, but on the sense that I don't think we would have grown as much as people and gotten to think about things from these different perspectives as much as we have. So that's been awesome. We certainly have a few other people that we'd like to thank that weren't our guests, and really there kind of is too many to list on one hand, because everyone we've had conversations with on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, what have you, that's been hugely appreciated, and we really can't thank every single one here and keep this episode a reasonable amount of time. But just I want you to know that if you've reached out to us and had an interaction with us, we've appreciated that. Everything that anyone has done to support the show has been greatly appreciated. These are just a few that we've gotten to know and talk to through Twitter, Facebook, whatever, and it's just been great to get to know. First is the Going Viking Twitter account, and that one's special because this is kind of like a collection of all of these great podcasts that are kind of in this community, and it's a great web page that's set up there. And check it out at Going Viking on Twitter. And we've definitely been doing some cool things with Going Viking. Then there is Heathen Moon, which we are very thankful for. It's Ryan, the proprietor there, and I guess it's with his wife as well. Made us a set of runes with these great, beautiful boxes, and it's just been great getting to know Ryan and talk to him. And his shop is called Heathen Moon. It's heathenmoon.ca, I believe. He's from Canada, like us, and check it out. He's got some really unique pieces, and he's just been one of our biggest supporters, which has been awesome.
Absolutely, and it's all handmade by him and his wife. And the craftsmanship is incredible. So, yeah, definitely check out his shop. If you're, I guess, outside of Canada, they do some bone work, so that might not be able to travel. I'm not sure, but definitely check it out. And it's worth your while. There's some beautiful things there.
Absolutely. And then another great connection we made is with Viking Beard Company out of the UK, and it's another situation where I think they don't have shipping outside of the UK or EU at the moment here, but their products are available in North America just through distributors and that. But still, check out their website. They've been awesome. They've just been a lot of fun to get to know on social media. They have some great social media accounts that are just a lot of fun to follow. And we use beard products, and it's just been a lot of fun getting to know a great brand that it's all handmade again out of great materials and things. So we've just been happy to get to know them too. So
absolutely, yeah. No, it's just awesome getting to know. They're from the UK, so starting to get a reach outside of just our little bubble, and they're doing what they love, and it dovetails nicely with what we're doing. So yeah.
And these next two as well, I'll mention kind of in a group, because they are the podcasts in the kind of the Viking community or sphere that we haven't gotten to talk to yet, mostly because I think we've actually been semi-intentionally holding off asking them to come on the show, because they were big and established before we got started. And with Noah and Fjorn there, they were, and now with Siobhan as well, they were all kind of either getting going around the time where we did, or they even reached out first in Noah's and Siobhan's case. But we figured we were a little more more on the same level as far as being able to talk to them. But then the Viking Age podcast and Saga thing are like the established Viking Norse mythology podcasts that have been around for a few years now, quite a few years, and have a big following sort of thing. And I think we wanted to get to a similar level before reaching out, but we'd certainly like to talk to either one of them. So, but they're great. We recommend them very highly. And Viking Age is very much like kind of a Viking history podcast and goes into a lot of that in great detail, well researched. Saga thing does something cool. They kind of rate and review all these sagas and kind of do a little kind of a rating system with them, and it's a lot of fun. They definitely all know what they're talking about on these two shows. So, and I would say I would put them on the level of expert where we aren't not.
Yes, and we're thankful too that they kind of like have, we're just following on this sort of well-worn path that they've made for us already, right? Like they did all the heavy lifting, and now we're coming in being like, oh, this isn't too bad. Like, but no, they're the ones who kind of kicked open the door, and we just happened to fall through. But yeah, they've done incredible work.
Exactly, and now it's just great to have it. And it would have been maybe appropriate to actually put going Viking now, because actually this whole going Viking thing has all tied together with all these podcasts and everything like that, and these brands and books and things like that, and check it all out. It's all great, and it's great to see this kind of all this Viking and Norse stuff community building up, sort of thing. And of course we sort of we dig into a few other things, Finnish, and we're happy to dig into other traditions and that. But of course, it's the Poetic Edda. That's the main thing we've been covering. So we're happy to just be a part of this group of amazing podcasts and people doing great things with Old Norse mythology, and all that. It's a lot of fun.
Absolutely.
And last but certainly not least, I would absolutely be remiss if I didn't mention Dr. Jordan Peterson. This show would not exist without his work on mythology, especially Maps of Meaning, his 1999 book, tome, really. And he did a lot of amazing work on archetypes and myth and mythology. And his work is built on Carl Jung's and Joseph Campbell's. And he's a psychologist, and he approaches it from that perspective. And we've learned so much from his work. His university lectures that are on YouTube as well have been huge. Like his Maps of Meaning class is kind of like a lecture form of his book, his Maps of Meaning book. And then he did a series on the Bible, on the biblical stories. And that was really the inspiration for this show. We thought we could apply some of the similar ideas that he's talked about and that we've got a very, very rudimentary grasp on, and apply them to Old Norse, because these are the stories that we're passionate about. In the Kalevala, we're just really, really into these stories, and we have been for a very long time. And the Northern Myths podcast is a result. And yeah, we would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge that, because honestly, this show would not exist without the work of Dr. Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, absolutely. There's really no other way to say it. I mean, if we hadn't come across his work, it wouldn't have opened any of these doors to Jung, to Campbell, Erik Neumann, another one I'm just thinking of. And we wouldn't have been thinking of, or started thinking of, the world in sort of this mythological way. And then, with his biblical lectures, like that was sort of it. I was like, man, this is incredible. All this meaning in these stories that I didn't know of before. And then I was like, well, what about these other stories that I love? Because you can go find incredible works done on a lot of I guess so-called Eastern religions like Hinduism, Buddhism, that kind of thing. Like that's all there, and it was very popular like in the 60s and 70s. But there's not so much on, or at least I wasn't able to find much on like Norse mythology and things like that. So it was like, and I remember we had talked like, well, is there anything? And then we just like sat and then we looked at each other like, oh no, do we have to do this? And so that's how this podcast came to be. It's like, okay, well, if we're going to do it, like, let's not just like study, have mythology study on our own. Like, let's do something with it. And maybe other people are interested and they'll be able to tell us things that we don't know. Because, if we're being totally honest, a lot of this is just a very selfish way of learning more for us. Like, it's lovely that everyone's listening, but we'd still be doing it if people weren't. And we're doing it so that we learn. So, but yeah, so thank you for, indulging us and teaching us things, like giving us ideas that we wouldn't have had before, and interacting with us and letting us sort of digest these ideas and pull them apart and turn them upside down, all that kind of stuff. Like, it's awesome.
It is. You couldn't have said it better. That's what this show is to me. It's really become a huge, huge part of my life. And, I can't thank everyone who supported us enough. Everyone mentioned here. I'll add a final one I didn't even have written down here. Thank you to our wives for letting us spend all this time on this on almost a weekly basis. Come spend a few hours to record this stuff. They certainly put up with us, and they I think they get that this hobby for us is a good thing, and we're actually doing something that we find meaningful. So it's nice of them to let us.
Yes. Funnily enough, my wife doesn't actually listen to the podcast because she's not all that interested in mythology. So she'll never hear it, but I am thankful that, she lets me go out and do this kind of weird thing.
Mine might. Thanks, Sarah. Okay, and I think that is going to be it for us for today. Thank you very much for listening. 2018 has been an amazing year for us, and we hope for more of the same, if not, more amazing things in 2019. I think I'm actually just going to cut it off here. You know that we would always appreciate a share or a like or a subscribe or anything like that. Our social media information is going to be below, so if you want to get in touch with us, you can do so there. Thank you very much for listening. Again, this has been an amazing experience. This show is something else. And it's really been an honor to get to go through this and to be on this journey. So,
absolutely. And I guess there's only one thing left, and it's maybe a good New Year's resolution. And that's for all of us to go out and find what myth we're living.
This has been the Northern Myths Podcast. Thank you very much for listening.